Hey guys, TheAirsoftTech here and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at another build I did for a customer. Now I don't typically do these kind of builds for customers, this kind of build being a DSG build, especially one like this where it's very stress performance. So I don't typically do these. This is an 8-tooth DSG build, 10:1 ratio, 28 TPA motor, BTC Spectre Mark II, and then an SP180 spring. So this is a pretty hard-hitting build. It's designed to be fast and hard-hitting, but the customer provided me with a lot of really nice and high-quality parts, so I figured, why not? And for other reasons, I also figured, why not? So let's actually break down the build and talk about it. All right, so like I said in the last clip, I don't typically build extremely high performance, extremely high stress DSG builds for other people, simply because as you increase the performance level of a gun that you're building, in terms of rate of fire, joule output, just overall stress in the gearbox, you tend to decrease the reliability levels. And so I like to build extremely reliable, extremely high performing guns. And then when you build a DSG at a rate of fire like this, it tends to make it significantly less reliable. But like I said also, the customer was willing to provide some very high quality parts. And so I just figured, heck, why not? I don't build these very often for other people, so might as well, right? So let me actually break off the upper receiver, and I'll show you what I mean by some high quality parts. And then we'll also talk about all the tuning and modifications I did. All right, so here is a look at some of the high quality parts that we are working with in this build. So like I said, the customer really didn't mind supplying some high quality parts. We have a retro arms, a split gearbox shell integrated with the hop-up chamber that is also retro arms, obviously. An EDGI 6.01 barrel that has been R-hopped. So that's all the stuff, visually here. Like I said, this is a split gearbox shell, so I can pop this off and we can look at the lower. So let me do that real quick. All right, so we have the upper receiver gearbox shell split away from the lower receiver gearbox shell. These retro arms gearbox shells are really nice, especially the most recent generation of them. I remember when they first came out, they had a ton of spec problems. So these newer ones, definitely on point, very tough, very easy to work with, and really pretty looking too. So in this upper gearbox shell, we have an SHS 15-tooth steel rack piston. We have a Lonex tappet plate that I have cut to fit for a DSG. I have some special tappet plate springs that you can get from MC Master Car. You can get like a pack of 10 of them for really cheap, and I recommend it. They're more durable. They're a little bit stronger, so they return the tappet plate more quickly, and you don't have to worry about cutting the tappet plate springs anymore with these new ones. So that's what I use for these high performance DSG builds, just returns my tappet plate rapidly. And then on the inside, I think I just have some random Lonex or some sort of styled black M4 air seal nozzle that has an O-ring in it. So that's in there, and then the cylinder head I believe is some standard aluminum cylinder head, version 2 obviously. And then on the inside I have the SP180 spring with the retro arms quick change spring system here. This spring would be near impossible to put in, at least for me, without that quick change spring guide system. So super duper cool, really appreciate it. Let's move on to the lower receiver. All right, and then in the lower receiver, we have as well some really awesome parts. We have obviously the retro arms lower receiver gearbox shell. Really, again, same thing as the upper, really on spec. All these parts fit wonderfully inside and extremely durable, even though you really don't need the durability in the lower gearbox shell because there's really no stress occurring there. You still have it, so that's super cool. BTC Chimera Mark II, the one that is Bluetooth enabled, so that is awesome. No longer have to pull the trigger, and connect the battery and pull the trigger and all that stuff, just a program. So now we can just do it from our phones. The Siege Tech 10:1 ratio gears. The spur and the bevel, I believe, are Gen 2, and the DSG is an 8-tooth, most recent gen, which I believe is a Gen 3. So that is working really well. There are slightly different colors between the sector gear and the spur and bevel, just because, well, slightly different generations. So you have an ASG 28 TPA motor here. Hold on. Let's get that back on. ASG 28 TPA motor here. It works pretty well. I do think ASG motors are kind of overpriced here recently, just because the performance for what you pay for, it's not quite there. And then we have some random 8mm steel bushings, because bearings would be stupid to put in here. Anyway, and then we have this Lonex CNC to trigger here. It works really well with the Gearbox shell. Obviously, it's the same company, it should. And then it works really well with the BTC Spectre. Really smooth, really short trigger pull, and that is super cool. And on the other side here, obviously we have this selector switch here that is by Retro Arms. Another thing too is that the person who sent me this gun did not send a couple parts that I had to source myself. And one of the things that he did not send is a bearing to fit underneath of the selector switch. So I had to find one myself and get the selector switch to work appropriately. So now it does, it really solidly clicks into place. I made a video on how I did that a couple weeks ago. So if you want to know about that, go check it out. One of the things that I did have to do is make my own little buffer tube securing washer. The customer did not send the one that comes stock with all these AEGs and all these buffer tube replacements. So I had to make one myself. So I went to the hardware store, bought a couple shims that fit perfectly into the buffer tube, which this one does, cut out a little slot for my wires to advance through, just like that. And yeah, it works perfectly. So that's an easy fix, because it's very hard to find those airsoft style buffer tube securing washers. And then just before we put it all back together, I do love showing off the performance of these lower gearbox shells with all these high-end parts here. So got an 11 volt LiPo battery hooked up, maximum active braking, just to kind of show off the rapid gear reset and cycling speed that we can have here. So semi-auto. So that's super duper cool. It's really fun to watch. It's really just cool to build these. So full auto, and then back to semi. And then you see the gear slowly resets to a semi-auto position. So super duper cool. The active braking is on primarily just to help get the gearbox shell, the upper gearbox shell attached to the lower. And also to remove the upper gearbox shell from the lower. You don't want to have no active braking on, have your gear like halfway cycled with your piston halfway pulled back and then rip this off. That's not very good. So that's a lot of stress on your piston teeth, and you can strip them and just damage them. So don't do that. Set your max active braking on before you take off or put back on your gearbox shell. And then once you do that, you can set the active braking back down to minimum or none. So as you can see, this gun is shooting about 295 FPS with a 0.28 gram BB, which is pretty close to about 380 FPS with a 0.20 gram BB. And so in addition to that, the gun is actually very efficient as well. The really cool thing about BTC Spectre Mark II and the new Titan MOSFETs is that via Bluetooth, you can actually monitor your amp demand and your amp draw in real time. And so doing so with this gun, it's showing me that I'm pulling about 32 amps on semi-auto and about 28 to 29 amps on full auto, which is actually a pretty efficient setup for this kind of build. All right, guys, that's gonna have to do it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, and comment down below. All three of those things greatly help me out. As per usual, I will see you guys in the next video of whatever the heck I'm doing. But until then, stay tuned, techs.